What do you think? Because what we're seeing now from criminals that have, and I don't know how much you've noticed this, but we've seen a ramping up in criminal activity really since like probably the end of last year, and it hasn't stopped. But criminals now are kind of adjusting their approach to accommodate the changes that carriers have made on the payment and financial side, because many carriers are now not automatically approving these large ransoms, or just kind of passing that through. They're pushing back, they're questioning, they're requiring more both of the insured and kind of holding or disincentivizing the attackers to make a large gain from that. So from your perspective, what do you think what do you think that is, or how do you think that's going to play out in terms of the industry-wide conversation that's now happening as a result of both the national cybersecurity strategy that was announced, and some of the other specifically like vendor risk management and other frameworks that are now kind of trending in the direction that this report is suggesting, and advocating for just kind of basic cyber hygiene? How do you think that'll play out with with the carriers and the claims that are now coming through kind of more modern as post all of this kind of conversation?
Well, I think the first point is to operate from the thing that we know, which is that the adversary will always adjust, always. And we know this. I mean, it's I think back to when Zeus and credential theft was our biggest concern, lo these many years ago, 10 years ago, or however many years it was. But it felt at that time, with the 140 million variants of Zeus that propagated, that really was the worst thing that could happen to us. And that's long forgotten now at this point. And so I think part of it is recognizing the need generally to understand what you just said, which is that basic cyber hygiene is relevant no matter what the attack profile is or what the telemetry is, because that's something that will be forever a whack-a-mole game that we will play. And so we have to be very clear that these controls do these things. And we know that. And we know that broadly, it hasn't really changed substantively from the point of view. We've gotten better at things like threat hunting or understanding threat intelligence or other things. But there is sort of just the fundamentals. And then how do we build on the fundamentals? And I think that's the part from the insurance perspective that I think is still very, I wouldn't say nascent, but squishy, maybe technical term, because people, they really want to know how to manage what would they call the silent cyber question, which is, what is the thing that we haven't thought of that we should ask a question about? And I think that it has to be a bit more broad, because then it more broadly takes in the things that we haven't anticipated, but we know are effective. And if you haven't done them, then the likelihood of having severity or frequency is much higher. So when we think about like that 6x figure, then that becomes, well, what are all the scenarios in which that helps mitigate these potential risks? And that's really, I feel like there's a lot of specificity towards, we want to stop ransom. And it's like, no, that's a symptom. We want to stop the things that allow whatever that malware might be to get them in, or how we catch it. And I think that that's more the focus. And so certainly PAM is a big one. I think, that we will continue to evolve around, and how also services play into this, because I'm a firm believer, and I watch this a lot as we've evolved, is that either whether it's monitoring services or so on, that services, as opposed to just kit, play a very fundamental role in supporting organizations and mitigating threats.
Well, services, and certainly the architecture, and I guess the unspoken parameters of how that service is delivered. The whether we're talking about SLA, whether we're talking about the hygiene and practices that come along with a part of implementing and deploying and transitioning those things to stakeholders internal to companies. I completely agree with that. I think that's a not often discussed, but often very relevant conversation, especially when we see claims come, or we work on claims that involve third parties that were providing services that connect in some way to either the data or systems of the victim organization, and just kind of watching that play out, it really kind of raises the bar for anyone that's providing any of those kind of services and those types of system integrations, because whether you're talking about an API, AI itself, and how organizations are leveraging that technology, or how attackers are leveraging those things, um, that is very much the relevant conversation. How are we protecting those things? Is and these are all really basic questions, right? Like, how are we protecting those things? Is the authenticated party really the party that should be accessing this? None of this is, I would say, rocket science from a cybersecurity perspective, but these are practical questions that a lot of organizations just frankly weren't asking themselves or their vendors, um, through the course of doing business. They just kind of went and kind of let it fall by the wayside, and security was always kind of an afterthought. And so that's, I think, my what I take away from that, and hearing your feedback, um, is that I think integrating vendor risk conversations with the normal process of business and making it not such a distinct life cycle that requires its own care and feeding, but something that is inherently a part of the way you do business with third parties as an organization, especially when you're a service provider, I think is that's the real key for folks that want to get ahead of that particular piece.